doing? My name is Kevin Hughes, and I have a joint appointment in the Department of Humanities and the Department of Theology and Religious Studies. And for the last, until this year, the last 8 years, I was chair of the Humanities Department. And on behalf of the Humanities Department, I just want to say that we are so thrilled to have this course as part of our offerings for a couple of reasons. One, if you were to stretch it out, the full name of the Humanities Department is the Humanities and Augustinian Traditions Department. And so we're a relatively new program. In academic terms, we're new. We're about 15 years old. And the program was formed, the dean at the time, Dr. K.L. Ellis, wanted us to sort of, shepherd the Augustinian and Catholic intellectual tradition of the college. And so that was our charge from the dean was to make sure, not that other departments and other programs don't do that, to make sure that the fullness of the Catholic intellectual tradition was represented. And so when the opportunity to sort of work with Father Joe and hold this course within the Humanities Department came along, that was crucial for us. One of the things that we really seek to do in the Department of Humanities, most of you are not majors or minors within that department, but it doesn't matter. What we seek to do is to see the ways in which the Catholic intellectual tradition is not just it is not just a sort of matter of the head, not just a matter of sort of thinking the right things, but what we seek to do is integrate the human person, integrate your education into the big questions in life, but really all of the big questions pointing to the big question: how should I live? How should my life be? What would be a good human life? And where am I called to live and to serve and to love and to do all those things? How can all of that make sense? So in the Department of Humanities, we have these 4 gateway courses that are built around questions rather than ideas or concepts. They're person, society, world, and God. And is there a God? What difference does that make in the way we think about everything? How do I relate to the natural world around me? And what can science tell me, and what are its limits? How do I think about politics, society, friendship, all of these sort of social dimensions of life? But the most important thing, all those questions turn around this question of the human person. What does it mean to be human? What's a good human life? And so this course really fits, this course and the experience that you will have of doing some intellectual work here beforehand, and then taking it sort of on the road, as it were, sort of walking the walk, as well as talking the talk, really sort of captures an important dimension of what we seek to do in the Department of Humanities. Does that make sense to you? So anyway, I'm just so glad that we can be a part of this. Everybody has a handout. I want to talk today about pilgrimage and about sort of where this idea comes from, how we might think of it, what are kind of its essential elements, what are the pieces of the puzzle that make up, what makes a pilgrimage different from a vacation, right? What makes a pilgrimage different from being a tourist or even an ambassador? What would the difference be? How do we think about what makes pilgrimage? I think as we think about crossing borders in the 21st century, we have a couple of major ideas or metaphors. We think about migrants, right? We have a huge debate in our country today. The election's going to have a lot to do with this, about what do we do with migrant labor, right? People who come into our country to try to make a living, to send money back to their homes. So what is it like? How do we deal with migrants within our country in this way, migrant labor? We don't often think about the question, what's it like to be a migrant? But that would be something worth thinking about. We have this category of tourists that we probably are more familiar with. What's it like to go visit leave home, but go visit? What's the purpose of tourism in that way? Kind of get a broader perspective, something like that. See parts of the world you haven't seen, encounter another culture. What makes that different from a pilgrimage? Now, very pressing for us, I think we have this category of refugee. I mean, we are in the midst of the greatest refugee crisis in our world, not just in our country, that we've seen since the end of the Second World War. Right? With so many people pressed out of their homes and homeless fleeing their homes into Europe, into the US, into countries around the world, seeking refuge from violence and death. We watch what's unfolding in the last month or so in Aleppo, in Syria, and those are the people who had to stay behind. How many people have left trying to get away from precisely that kind of experience. So those are the kind of ideas that we have of what it's like to leave home, I guess, in a way, right? What makes pilgrimage sort of different? Pilgrimages are things that people do with intention and purpose. And I'm going to talk about seven different categories, 7 different qualities, I think, that makes pilgrimage. But one of the things we know is we look at religions, not just Christianity, but we look at religions around the world. One of the things that religious people do is they go on trips with a religious intention. Right? They go on trips because a place matters. They want to see the birthplace of the Buddha. They want to see, right? Where right now we're on the cusp of the Hajj, right? The great one of the pillars of Islam is to those who can should go on the Hajj, the great pilgrimage to Mecca, right? So religious people go on pilgrimages. Why? Why do they do that? I think it has to do with the fact that what religious thinking often is all about is about where does holiness, and what do we mean by that? Where does some sense of the sacred, where does God touch life as we know it? Right? Where does God sort of intersect? And in these places where the Buddha was born, where Muhammad had this central experience of the founding Ummah, the founding community, where Jesus walked, where he lived and where he died. Right? For religious people, getting in touch with those places is a way of getting in touch with that first experience. So one of the things that we're going to think about is the ways in which pilgrimage has played a role, and how can we, because it's not necessarily familiar to us, we're not used to thinking in this way, how do we sort of try to recapture a little bit of that sensibility? And that's, I want to say, and I'll say something at each point along the way, that's not only for the Christians or the Catholics in the room. How do we get in touch with that sort of experience, that sort of reality, whether or not whatever our particular religious convictions may be? How can this trip be different in a sense? Be intentional in that way. You know what I mean when I say intentional? Right? Something that you're doing with a purpose in mind. That's one of the things that I think really sets pilgrimage apart. Instead of doing things with an intention in mind, and pilgrimages therefore are about transformation, personal transformation. Some of the greatest literature in the Christian church, the earliest literature we have, some of it's about pilgrimage. The first writing that we have, first substantial long writing we have from a woman author in Christian tradition is a woman named Egeria. Egeria was a woman who was from Europe, but she made the trip to the Holy Land. We have a record of her peregrinatio, her pellegrinagio, Latin term would be peregrinatio, in like the 350s, 380s. It's very unusual to have an actual, first-person account from anybody, but a first-person account from a woman in particular. It's really striking. And she describes her experience of walking around in the land where, as far as she understands, where Jesus lived, where Jesus died, where the Last Supper happened, all of these experiences. What's interesting about Egeria is that it's not just about those religious places, but she's also making observations about the people who are making the trip too. Because she's interested not just in, I saw it, but she's interested in what happens to me, what happens to us when we experience these places. This is not necessarily a happy dimension of pilgrimage, but one of the other sort of major pilgrimage takes on a significant role in the Christian tradition. The Crusades, sort of not always a happy memory for Christians that we had the Crusades, and it's complicated to unpack exactly how to talk about that. That's not what we're doing here today. But one of the motivations for the Crusades was that the Pope let everybody know in Europe that the people who were controlling the holy city of Jerusalem were blocking Christian pilgrims from coming in. And that, I mean, so however complex the motivations and all that for the Crusades may be, it tells you a little bit about how important it was for these early Christians to preserve their access to these places, right? To preserve the possibility of pilgrimage, that they would go to war for it. Like I said, I'm not necessarily condoning it. I'm just saying it's an indication of how important it was. Does that make sense to you? Right? Still today, from that time and before, and still happens today, there's a famous pilgrimage, and I think you're going to see something, you're going to see a little bit of the way? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's a film called The Way that gives a little chronicle of one of the great pilgrimage routes that's still in practice today, the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela on the coast of Spain, right? And the story that informs that is St. James, Santiago, one of the apostles, according to the legend, that was his mission. He went to Spain, and then he died there. And so the pilgrimage is to see, to visit the relics of Santiago, and to make this journey to get there. And I think you'll see in the bits of the film that you're going to watch that you see this relationship between traveling and personal transformation. Those are the questions that are always asked. Why? I mean, you could give other examples. Anybody read the Canterbury Tales or part of the Canterbury Tales? Okay, you do that in English, right? Read like the prologue or whatever. That's about pilgrimage to Canterbury, right? To Thomas a Becket, who was martyred in the Cathedral of Canterbury. So it could be a local thing. So the important here is that within the Christian tradition, it's not all about Jerusalem. That's obviously a really central and important one. But it's not all about Jerusalem. There are other sites that are particularly important. In England, Canterbury was an important pilgrimage, right? You would just sort of head out in spring and go for a walk and walk your way to Canterbury without bringing food and everything, and you would find your way there and pray. But if you were in Spain, that pilgrimage wouldn't mean anything necessarily, right? So why do we do the pilgrimage we do here? Well, we're walking in the footsteps of Augustine, and for reasons that Father Joe has already said, that's important for us. Okay, we talk about Dante, we talk about John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, all these sort of great images, but it means that, and I'll say a little bit more about this in a little bit, pilgrimage becomes, in the Christian tradition, what you might call a master metaphor. Right? It becomes a master metaphor. It becomes a way in which we think about not just what you're going to do for a week in October, but the way we think about what the Christian life is all about itself. Why? Well, a couple of ways of thinking about that. Take a look at this image that's on the top of your sheet there. This is a wood cut from the Middle Ages, and it's telling you, right? There are all sorts of markers in this that this guy is going on a pilgrimage. So how might we know? Just tell me what you see here. How do we know this guy is going on a pilgrimage? Yeah. He's got his staff, right? This is one of the signs of pilgrimage, right? When you go on pilgrimage, you take your staff. What else? Yeah. He's barefoot, right? So there's a sense he's going on a journey. He needs support for his journey, right? And he's in bare feet. He's heading out from home. He's walking in bare feet. What else do you see? Looks like he's holding a rosary or some kind of prayer beads, right? He's taking some kind of devotional work to do, some kind of meditative work to do as he walks, right? So pilgrimage has a certain kind of characteristics that when you put this image up in the Middle Ages, everybody would say, oh yeah, that's a pilgrimage, right? We know what we're talking about there. And we still see some of those elements in the way in which we want to think about pilgrimage today. I want to say a little bit about this master metaphor, though. This quote's on your sheet too, but take a look at this. Christians live in their own countries as though they were only passing through. They play their full role as citizens, but they labor under all the disabilities of aliens. Any country can be their homeland, but for them, their homeland, wherever it may be, is a foreign country. They pass their days upon earth, but they are citizens of heaven. So if that's he's drawing on this image of pilgrimage to say, this is kind of how we live. What do you think he means by that? What sort of phrases sort of jump off the screen there, or jump off your page? What are sort of some key words that you see going on there? Aliens? And say some more. So why do you think that's key, or what do you think it's all about?
I mean, like, if you were saying aliens, you seem like they don't belong.
Right. And everybody, I think we get this, but I'll say it out loud just so to make sure we're on the same page. When we say aliens, we don't mean like people from outer space. Right? You get that, right? We mean people from a foreign land. Good. And so say again what you said, Kevin?
No, I just said like if you're saying it just kind of sounds like someone that doesn't belong.
Somebody who doesn't belong. Isn't that kind of negative? What's it mean to say if we're Christians, there's a way it's sort of kind of like we don't really belong? What do you think that this guy's writing a letter to this guy Diognetus in the 2nd century? What do you think he's saying? In what sense do Christians not belong? Yeah, try it again. Yeah, keep going.
I guess it's kind of like the key phrase you think of, like they're in the world but not of the world.
In the world but not of the world. I think that's brilliant, right? Now, it's important to sort of balance that out. Does that mean that we don't really like our life here? That we don't really? No, that's not what it's saying at all. It's saying you play your full role as citizens, right? You do the things that people do. You invest in the world in which you're living. But there's a way in which you know that it's not, you're in the world but not of it. It means that you're engaged by the world around you, but you're not defined by it. Let me say that again. You're engaged in the world around you, but you're not defined by it. You're always on the way. As we think about that, we think about the job that you hope to get when you get out of Villanova, right? We all hope that we find a vocation and a job that pays well, that leads us to the kind of success we hope for, that allows us to support a family, whatever it is that that helps us to serve God and each other. And however we envision that, we hope for all of that. What happens when you don't get that job? What do you do with that? Well, if everything in your life had been riding on that moment, then you feel like your life is over. What did I do all this for? Right? But if you know that the job is really part of what I want, because my full identity is somewhere else, is deeper than that in a sense, yeah? Right? Then you're in a different territory. Does that make sense? Yeah? You're with me here, yes? I tend to sort of check in with you guys a lot, if that's okay. I'm always checking in. All right. Okay. So that's kind of a master metaphor for how we think about that. So one of the ways in which Christians have always used pilgrimage is, let me have this little tiny experience of being on a journey to some way, because that might give me an insight into my life as a journey to somewhere, right? Journey into deeper relationship with God and with each other. A journey into a deeper understanding of who and what I am. A journey into what the deepest source of my identity is, right? That I'm not sort of finished, in a sense, when I get the job, or if I don't get the job. Make sense? Right? So that's something to bear in mind as you think about your own pilgrimage. Is this in a way a kind of a training ground for a way to think about your life? And I'll say a little bit more about that when we get into some of the specifics. But just to sort of bring it home to our beloved St. Augustine, right? Here it is in the city of God. God. Somebody mentioned city God right away, right? We are but pilgrims on a journey without as yet a fixed abode. We are on our way. We are not yet in our native land. We are in a state of longing, but not yet enjoyment, meaning rest. And everybody, the most famous quote from Confessions, right? You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you. So we're not at rest. Let us continue on our way and continue without sloth or respite so that we ultimately arrive at our destination. So that's Augustine in the City of God playing out that same metaphor in that way. So I only did a couple of these bits that I want to think about the elements of 7 dimensions of pilgrimage. So what I want to say before we sort of get into those is that I think a pilgrim is always in one sense, this sort of master metaphor, this sort of push and pull of like full citizen and yet not quite at home, finding happiness but not finding complete rest, right? That sort of dimension of this means that when a pilgrim is always in some sense leaving home and in another sense going home. In some sense, you're leaving home, obviously. You're leaving the place that you're comfortable in, you're leaving family and friends, you're leaving the normal circumstances of your life. But a pilgrimage is always about having an end in mind, and not just the end of the trip, but wanting to end up somewhere that's going to be the sort of the place that helps all these other places make sense. So if you're on the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, friends of mine who have done this, I haven't done it myself, but talk about the experience of sort of coming up over the hill, and off in the distance, you see the church of Santiago there, right? And you just see the church there, and you've worked so hard, you've walked for so long, and you see this image, and you're just like, there it is. And you know that experience in large or small ways, right? You know what it's like to sort of be on a long journey. Anybody run races? Anybody ever run? Like do a 5K or a 10K or something like that? Like if you run and you had a bad race, you know what it's like to come around the bend and see the finish line there. You're just like, oh, praise God, there it is, right? You're hurting, but somehow you always run faster that last bit, right? You get that because you know that you're headed somewhere. You're headed on a way in that way. So in some ways you're leaving home, and in some ways you're coming home.
Yeah. 2 of the campus ministry interns, Lacey Mickelson and Duncan, went on Compostela, went on a pilgrimage this summer. So they can't come today to talk to you, but they're going to come and share their experience of that pilgrimage that they went on this summer. Just so that you have a sense of 2 people around your age who actually did a spiritual pilgrimage, whereas you're coming into this, from like, I want to go to Italy, and it happens to be a pilgrimage. They wanted to go on pilgrimage, which happened to be in Spain.
Yeah.
So it's a different mindset when they started out. But they're gonna talk to us probably next week.
Then there are a lot of things in common. I think you'll see. Right. I think that's really true. So in some sense you're leaving home, in some sense you're coming home. To arrive at the end of a pilgrimage is in some ways to come home, even if you're in a foreign place. Right? To have that sense of relief, of arrival, I think is really key. Okay, so I'd like to talk about Victor and Edith Turner. I'm not necessarily going to talk about that just in the interest of time, kind of moving things forward, because they did cross. Victor and Edith Turner are cultural anthropologists. They're married for years and years. They both died. Edith Turner just died this year. But they did great cross-cultural surveys of major world religions and how they sort of identified some central elements. The one piece that I want to focus on is they came up with this idea, and they kind of coined this term. And I just want to give it to you because I think you ought to be prepared for it. And it's this term liminality. It's on your sheet there, right? Liminality. It sounds like technical, academic, blah, 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 right? And in some ways it is. Okay, all right, fine. But liminality, limina, is the Latin word for threshold or border, right? And they talked about part of the experience, one of the ways in which pilgrimage works, in a sense, is that by getting you out of your familiar territory, but not quite in another territory that will you're at least settled in. On this place in between, you're on the threshold. You're in this sort of liminal space, as they would say. Right? And what is that liminal space? It means that you leave your comfortable horizons, and it means you open up in a new way. Right? You open up to a different kind of experience. Let me give you a real plain example. I think I put it down here. Yeah, airplane conversation. Have you ever gotten on a plane, right? Well, airplanes are weird, right? Because you get on this place, you're leaving home, it's a big deal. You think, oh my gosh, this massive piece of metal is going to hurtle through be 30,000 feet above the ground at one ridiculous rate of speed. That's kind of freaky for some people, right? Right? All that's all part of it. But then also, you're often sitting closer than you would sit to your brother or sister most of the time. To a complete stranger. Right? This is weird. And sometimes, sometimes you just try to deal with that weirdness by, I'm not going to talk to you. Right? And so you have to work really hard if you're in that space on a plane to kind of say, I'm in my own little world. Right? But on the other hand, you find sometimes when you're in a situation like that you have the strangest but most interesting conversations. Because nobody is quite in their comfort zone. There's a way in which you keep in this little bubble, but once the bubble is burst, you'll find yourself talking about things you can't believe you're saying to a complete stranger. Anybody have that experience? I mean, you don't have to give me details, I don't want that. But you know what I'm talking about, yeah? Right? That there's this weird kind of openness, a weird kind of vulnerability, and I don't mean it in a bad way there, a weird kind of tenderness, I don't know, maybe that sounds a little hokey, right? A weird kind of openness that you have when you leave your familiar environment and you're on the way to somewhere else. You don't have the sort of, what we crave is a way to kind of lock ourselves down and say, okay, now I know where I am, I know where the bathroom is, I know where the kitchen is, I'm good, right? But when you're on a journey like that, you don't really have that luxury, right? And so you're thrown into this situation of intimacy with people that you don't really know, and you don't have a lot of your usual defense mechanisms or whatever. And the conviction of these religious traditions, and Christianity in particular, is that this is a good thing, or at least it can be used in a good way. That openness that you are sort of pressed into can be the openness that leads to a kind of transformation. Make sense? Right? Because you will be able to hear things in a different way. You'll be able to experience things in a different way. Precisely because a lot of your habits of sort of, filters, a lot of your filters are sort of turned off. Make sense? Yeah? So, how do we make the best use? Because it's going to happen anyway. This happens when you travel, right? The airplane conversation reality is a reality. And if you're the kind of person, I have to confess, most of the time I'm this kind of person, it's just like, I don't want to talk to you. I'm reading my book. One of my friends who really doesn't like to have these kinds of conversations, his favorite move is to, if there's somebody who's talking to him and he doesn't say anything, because that would be rude, he just reaches for the airsafe bag. This is brilliant. I think this is really brilliant. Right, he reaches for the airsafe bag, because then the word's like, well, I don't want to say anything, it's going to upset him, right? So anyway, it's just a little flat out way. He wasn't actually feeling sick, just wanted to kind of, great. This is recorded for all eternity. Dr. Hughes' counsel on how to be antisocial on an airplane. Right? Just saying. So let's talk a little bit about these 7 dimensions of pilgrimage. The first I talk about is faith and stepping out. Pilgrimage, in its sort of basic meaning, is a religious act. I know not all of you are that word doesn't mean the same thing to all of you, right? For some people that's meaningful, for others not. But the nature of this trip is you're going to visit many places that Catholics find holy. In my own case, and I think this is near the end of my slides here, right? This is the famous image of Augustine and Monica in Ostia, right? Visiting Ostia was incredibly powerful for me. Because I've been reading confessions my whole life, and I will tell you my whole story. But reading the Confessions just hit me at a really important place in my life, where I just needed to hear those words. And so this scene was kind of enshrined in my brain. But it was enshrined as a sort of story. And then to see that story has a place, even if, the place is like, it's a ruin now. It's an archaeological dig, so it doesn't look like what it looked like for Augustine and Monica. There's no arch for them to look through like they're doing in this picture, right? But, right, the experience of being there and looking out at the sea in the same way that they were, very powerful for me. Even more powerful, and Father Joe mentioned it, visiting the tomb of Monica. And I've been Catholic all my life. I didn't expect this to have the impact it had on me. Right? Being Catholic in Europe is sort of different. There's lots of bones lying around everywhere. Right? It kind of creep you out a little bit if you're not used to it. Right? Bones and skin and heads. We're a wonderfully earthy religion this way. But visiting Monica's tomb in the Church of San Agostino, I remember it so vividly. It was officially like closed. They had it sort of separated off with some plastic curtains because they were doing some restoration work. But it was late at night when we went there. Well, Joe was there with me. It was late at night. We went in the Church of San Agostino, and I found it. And I just kind of had to get there. So I walked through these little plastic curtains there, and I just sat there. And the stillness and the peace and my relationship, even through the words of the Confessions with Monica, was so important to me. And I can't, you can take or leave this for what it's worth, but I had the experience that Monica was there with me. Not like a ghost, not anything like that, but just that I was accompanied by somebody, in a different way, by somebody who'd been important to me for so many years in my life. Now, as I said, you may not have that experience. That may be not an experience that you're interested in having. But in what sense, if that's not your world, in what sense can we still think about this as a pilgrimage for you? Well, at least in a way, in that sort of specifically Catholic and Augustinian character here, whatever your personal sort of faith commitments or experiences may be, you have been sort of bonded into a community here that has that legacy, right? That has that history and carries that history sort of in our bones. Somebody immediately, I heard you at the end of things, spotted, what makes Augustine difference? Veritas, Unitas, Caritas, right? We got that. We've always had that in our brain here at Villanova. What are these sort of specific, and there are lots of other ways in which we carry it in that words can express or don't express. Right? Just a way of being and a way of living. What it's like to have the Augustinian community at the sort of center and in service to this university. There are more ways that has an effect that we can't even articulate, can't even say out loud. So you're tapped into this community. You're a part of it, it's a part of you. Could this, whether or not you have a particular faith commitment, could this be an opportunity for you to sort of draw closer to the heart of this community in that way? To go back to its roots? To have that experience of deepening a relationship with this community that, I hope, we tend to be pretty happy here at Villanova. I hope we love this place and the people here. And is this an opportunity to sort of deepen our relationship with that community by getting to know the roots? I don't know, you've had this experience maybe. When you're in a relationship, romantic relationship, say, or friendship, it works the same way. You've hit a certain spot where the person says, come home, meet my family. And then you always have this experience that's sort of, hey, that's where I went to high school, and this is where I fell out of that tree and broke my arm when I was 6, or whatever, right? And that's a way of drawing into intimacy and relationship with somebody. And like I said, it could be a romantic relationship, it could be a friend, whatever. But you know that you're deepening a relationship by getting to know their story. Could this pilgrimage be an opportunity for you like that? Way of deepening your relationship with this place? Could it be an opportunity to feel gratitude for this community and everything that it's meant? And for whatever it was, all of these bits, from Augustine on forward, from Jesus to Augustine on forward, right? that allow this community to be what it is, you're going to get a little bit of a glimpse of that. And again, whether you're going to have a personal faith transformation or not, this could be an opportunity to say, thank you for this long history that's led up to this place where I'm connected to this community of Villanova. Does that make sense? So that, I think, if we think about faith, whether personal faith means something to you or not, there's a way of connecting into that. And that's a sense of stepping out. Another classic dimension of pilgrimage is penance or hardship. When I say going without. We talked about the guy with the bare feet and the staff. He's not carrying any backpack with food or anything with him, right? He's just walking out. He's going without. He's going to beg for his food. That's what he's going to do. Jesus sent his disciples out saying, take nothing for your journey. Take only a staff. Right? Part of the point of pilgrimage has always been to take a step away from the comforts of home. To discern sort of what the difference between my wants and my needs are. Right? And sometimes you can only do that by stepping out. Because your habits, I know when I go home, it comes to be 10 o'clock, I want to sit on the couch and watch TV. That's just what I want to do. Right? It's hard to break that habit when I'm home. It's a little easier to break that habit when I'm not. Yeah? And I don't need to sit in front of the TV at 10 o'clock. I want to. And that's not bad to want to, but it's important for me to know. I don't really need to do that. I could do something else. Pilgrimage grants an opportunity to do that sort of thing. If you're, and I assume it will be, if your pelgrinage was anything like mine when I did this 4 years ago, I think now, there will be good food, there will be good conversation, there will be laughter, there will be a warm bed and clean sheets at the end of every day. You will not, in any real sense of the term, be roughing it. You won't. But, right, you will be breaking out of your usual habits. And it might be worth thinking about whether you want to use that opportunity in a particular way. Take some time to consider, is there something that I might do a little differently while I'm on this trip? Is there something I might like to bring with me when I travel that I might leave behind this time? A hairdryer or some sort of little comfort. Maybe you need it, maybe you don't. It's up to you. There's no sort of hard and fast rule here. But maybe you want to think about, I always like to have, I don't know, something, right? I always like to carry this with me. Maybe I won't this time. Just to sort of do that. Or what if I were able to get up a half hour earlier to pray or to write a journal, sit and have a cup of tea alone, maybe to take an early morning walk or a run. What if I brought one pair of shoes fewer than I usually would? I don't know, right? In what way could I sort of give something up? Right? We always have this conversation around Lent and among Christians, right? When we're giving up or whatever. But a pilgrimage is that kind of opportunity to say, okay, what can I want to sort of practice giving up? Practice changing my relationship to. Right? It's worth thinking about. Bottom line, these liminal spaces that are pilgrimages give us an opportunity to stretch ourselves a little bit. It gives us a chance to open up some space in our lives for something new and something surprising to come in. And so you might want to think a little bit between now and when you go. What could I do? What could I do or what could I give up? What would be a little bit different that would introduce a little bit of power for me to discern between wants and needs? Yeah? So that's number 2, penance or hardship. Number 3, community, going with, right? Stepping out, going without, going with. Pilgrimages traditionally are not solitary affairs, right? The whole Canterbury Tales, if you read the Canterbury Tales, right? It's all about a bunch of people who don't usually hang out together, all being on the road together and telling each other stories. Victor and Edith Turner talk a lot about communitas. That's kind of like unitas, right? Communitas as a sort of effect of pilgrimage, and it's a little bit like I was talking about with the airplane conversation, but on a larger scale, right? Maybe you've had this experience on a retreat or some kind of, service trip or something that you may have done here, where a bunch of people who don't know each other, you're thrown into a particular kind of situation, and you find out that you have this kind of basis for friendship, right? The basis for community that you didn't know you had. Partly because the rules, our everyday rules are sort of suspended for a time. So that's got to be part of your experience, I hope. The question is, how can you intentionally, right, do something to help that be fostered, right? Not just sort of wait for it to happen accidentally. What can you do? Well, it depends on how you're going to work and there may be sort of ground rules or expectations about this. I don't know how Father Joseph would work this, and how you guys are going to figure it out. But, try to stay away from your phone for a day. Set yourself a couple of times, so, I'll only check in this hour of the day or something like that. Not just to sort of deprive yourself, but to make yourself more available to the people that you're right around, right? Because you've had this experience, I know, and I do it all the time too, where like you're in the middle of a conversation, there's a little lull in the conversation, everybody's like, it's a way we cover for uncomfortable situations. But it's also then a way that we pull ourselves away from each other. Yeah, we try to pull ourselves back, right? Yeah? Maybe you want to think about, one of these deals where for your meals together, phones go away, or phones go in the middle of the table, something like that, whatever. Right? And phones aren't the only thing, and there's no sort of, I don't want to sort of fetishize the phone as like the anything. But it is one of these ways in which we pull ourselves away from our experience with each other. Right? There might be other things. What could you do to make sure that you stay engaged with each other? Maybe you want to stay a little bit longer at the table, as long as you can make the bus. Can't miss the bus. But maybe instead of sort of, okay, we eat, and then we get up and we move to the next thing, if you have the time, spend a little time in conversation around the table. Enjoy that meal and all the richness that it brings. Something I will hope that you have the opportunity to do, if the weather permits and if time permits, if you're in San Gimignano, one of the best places in the universe, I think. If you're in San Gimignano, just, if you have the time, go sit up on the wall, right outside the community there, and watch the sunset.
We will be there.
Yeah. So do it. Do it. Make sure, and just go together and sit on the wall and watch the sunset. It's one of the best things you could possibly do for your soul. All right. So that's community, number 3. Number 4, ritual. Now, that's a specifically religious term, right? I want to think about ritual as making time or keeping time. I could decide whether I like keeping time or making time. I like keeping time because it's like keeping time like a song, like there's a rhythm to things, right? But also like keeping time is like a keepsake or a treasure or something you cherish, right? The Turners describe what pilgrimage is as a kinetic ritual, right? Usually we think about a ritual as something that happens in a church, right? You come, you show up, there's a ritual, and then you leave. But a kinetic ritual, a ritual in motion, means that the whole thing, in a sense, is a ritual, right? The whole thing, the journey itself is a ritual. You're going to have Mass, and a few times you're going to be in a lot of churches, right? But the whole, if you think about the whole process as a kind of as a way of keeping time in this way, or making time, I think that's really crucial. The great rabbinic theologian Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote a book called The Sabbath, and he said, we are sort of obsessed with space in the modern world. We sort of build offices and we build cities and we do all these things. But what if we were to think about how we build a palace in time? And what if we thought about the pilgrimage as building a sort of bridge in time in this way? What does that mean? Well, is there a way in which this ritual dimension of sort of taking care of the time is a way of making time for some things that your everyday life kind of can crowd out, can push to the margins? So, some ideas. This is kind of a funny idea, but I like it. I'll mention it to you. You can do what you want with it. In tradition, you know, in the early 20th century and for well before, and still in a lot of religious communities today, there was a tradition, a rule called holy silence, right? You had to keep a great silence. So after dinner, nobody would speak until the morning, right? And I'm not telling you to do that necessarily, but could you do something like, you know, after 10 o'clock we keep silence, not because we're going to get in trouble or because we're going to be loud, because kind of setting a tone for the end of the day. Or maybe it's just something that you want to do after everybody says goodnight, you go up to your room, you just say, okay, I'm just going to be quiet for a half hour before I actually turn in. I don't know, something like that. You know, and then at breakfast you break the fast by speaking. I don't know if anybody's had this experience. You go on the side of a tree. When the time comes to speak, after you've been silent for a while, there's this amazing feeling of like, wow, we're talking. This is great, you know. And there's a kind of richness that you have this experience just because you set aside time to be quiet. You can think about that. Morning and evening prayer be another way of thinking, right? To kind of mark the beginning and or the end of the day as, you know, with gratitude. Right? That's something you can think about. Come together quietly. If you're not the praying sort, you can still come and be in silence and still feel gratitude for this trip, for the people around you. Blessings at meals. See, these are all ways, they're just little things, but they're ways of sort of marking the time that you have, right? Setting a sort of marker that this time that we have together is a little bit different. So the way in which we have meals together is a little bit different. The way in which we talk or don't talk could be a little bit different, right? And, you know, be creative. You don't have to do these things I'm suggesting. They're just ideas as a way of sort of thinking about how I'm using the time, how we together, right, you'll have to have this conversation, how are we going to use the time that we have together? How are we going to set the time aside as a different kind of time and a different kind of experience? Yeah? So all this to say is that the ritual part of it doesn't have to be religious in the sort of traditional sense of it, but that keeping time together or making time together will help you have the experience. It'll open you up to experiencing, you know, this church, this path, this scenery in a different way. All right, number 5, votive offerings, leaving something behind. So very often, you know, if you go to the stones at the Cruz de Ferro in Compostela, right? If you go, people sort of bring stones at the Cross of Iron, the Cruz de Ferro in Compostela, and they're carrying a stone with them, and then they chuck the stone. So you go to see the Cross of Iron, it's like this big pile of stones sort of piled up around this cross. And the stones represent something that somebody wants to leave behind. Could you think about that? I know somebody who, on a Pellegrinaggio actually, I don't think they even made a big deal about it at the time, but they, on the first day, when they had sort of touched down in their first destination, they just found a stone, you know, a little pebble on the side of the road. They picked it up and they put it in their pocket, and then they just carried it, and that was a little reminder. There was that pebble, you know, a little reminder that something's a little bit different, and then they got to the end of the trip and they dropped it down. Now, you could think about that as like something that's bothering you, something that you're carrying around with you. Sort of just relate that in some way to this stone, and then, you know, carry it with you on the trip, and then drop it when you go. These kind of symbolic actions can be really, really powerful. You go to Lourdes. Anybody ever been to Lourdes in South France? Lourdes is a beautiful place. One of the things you see in Lourdes is that there's this area where there are just crutches everywhere. People who've had an experience of healing, they leave their crutches behind, and the crutches are kind of a testimony to the experience that they've had there, right? So one of the things you see at pilgrimage sites often are like piles of things. People leave stuff behind. Could you think about doing something like that? Could you carry a stone, or maybe just a little piece of paper? You know, somebody in your family or your friend that you're worried about, and you want to sort of hold them close to your heart while you're on this trip. Write down their name with a piece of paper, carry it with you, carry it in your wallet, something like that. Take it out, look at it, read the name to yourself. You know, I mean, again, I'm not writing rules for you, I'm not telling you what to do, but these are just ideas of ways of sort of capturing some of these traditional elements of pilgrimage that have been so transformative and effective for people. Are there little ways in which we can capture them? Yeah? All right, so this notion of leaving behind. Number 6, perseverance, hanging in. Pilgrimage has always been about preparing for hardship, you know, walking in bare feet, and that sort of iconic image of that guy. Now, I'm not asking you guys to walk in bare feet. I don't recommend it. Me and Father Joe would have to find a hospital for you when you get in big, you don't want to do that, right? Don't do that. But preparing for hardship is part of what pilgrimage has always been about. That's not all that different from any other trip. You know, you always have to, I mean, even the little things of like, why am I taking only one sweater? You know, I mean, that's in a sense of hardship. Like, I'm not used to having to pare down this way. You may have encountered, you know, Catholics, especially a sort of old-fashioned way of talking that sometimes people do still today, but sometimes people don't. We have a good old-fashioned way of talking about things, you know, going through hardship and offering it up. Take whatever suffering or hardship we're going through and offer it to God for some intention. You know, that may be meaningful to you or it may not be, but it's a way of really, if you sort of translate it into terms, those words don't mean anything to you. It's a way of holding somebody's pain, somebody's suffering, your own suffering, you know, close to you, and you connect it to somebody else's pain, somebody else's suffering, right? Your own hardship, you say, oh, well, my friend is suffering too. I'm going to connect those in some way and just say, you know, when I suffer, I'm thinking of you. It's very powerful. You know, a lot of us don't talk this way, like, oh, suffer, offer it up. Maybe we do, but Andrew Greeley, the famous Catholic priest and sociologist, he coined this term, Greeley's first law, that when others discover the value of something Catholic theorists lose confidence in it, right? It's like, you know, this idea that, like, you know, we've done this all along, and then somebody else discovers it, and you're like, yeah, okay, but I don't know if we do that anymore. You wonder if something like that's happened, because I love, for the last 10 years, I've been a pretty regular practitioner of yoga, right? And here in the Davis Center, for years on end, you stand there on your mat and they say, okay, form an intention that you're going to offer this practice for, right? I'm like, hey, I've heard that kind of language before, right? But now it's yoga, so it's cool, right? But anyway, so, you know, if that traditional Catholic language is somehow sort of off-putting to you, just see that it's everywhere around us in this way. It's, again, a way of thinking about our intention and putting it together in this way, right? We're all interconnected. And it's just true that when we make the sort of conscious decision to hang in there with a reason or a purpose in mind, it's easier and better for us than when we just hang in there just to endure. Right? So, you know, do what you can, do what you will with that. But when you encounter, I don't know. I mean, I don't even want to say it because I don't want to jinx anything. Not that I believe in that stuff too. But you know, you're running late, and so you miss a meal or something like that. And you have to sort of run to the corner store and get Cheetos. The Italian version of Cheetos, whatever, you know, right? And they're like, oh, this stinks, right? This is it. Well, okay. I'm going to put that together with some other kind of suffering, right? I mean, I talked about, if nothing comes to mind there, I already talked about the refugee crisis that we're in the midst of. You know, could this be an opportunity for you, if nothing else is sort of coming to mind, could this be an opportunity for you to think, okay, maybe this is an opportunity for me to sort of just put whatever little tiny hardship I go through, just connect it to the hardship that somebody's going through who's had to leave their home and everything behind entirely. And just a way to be mindful of that. Is that a way of thinking about it? So that's perseverance or hanging in. Offer it up. The last bit that I want to say, and this is equally important to all this other stuff, is celebration. Enjoying with. And, you know, I'm a theologian. I couldn't resist the seventh and seventh day and seventh day Sabbath, right? All that stuff, you know. So I arranged all these pieces. They were 7. I didn't make up another one just to make 7. But the 7th one, I definitely wanted to make sure celebration came there. Right? This is the Sabbath principle. All pilgrimages have these elements of, you know, penance, hardship, votive offering, perseverance, all of that stuff, but they're always, always, always festive occasions too. It's like a wedding or a baptism or a bar mitzvah. It's a time where you have both solemnity for seriousness and maybe even, you know, hardship in this way, but also for celebration. So yes, eat well. You will eat well. You have an excellent guide. Father Joe knows exactly where to find all the best food, always. It's like an instinct he's got. It's brilliant this way. So you will eat well. Stay up late, talking, laugh a lot, enjoy each other's company. Eat together, eat well, right? If you want to sort of think about how to embrace all of these bits, right, all of these elements, they all have to be held together with joy and affection. You know, joy and affection make perseverance and hardship and penance and all of that stuff make more sense. Because finally, you know, a pilgrimage is about the promise of arrival. Right? And you celebrate the promise of that arrival at each step of the way. It's like you know, for Catholics, we Easter is the sort of big celebration, right? But in a way, every Sunday is Easter, right? Every Sunday is a celebration. So it's like every step of the journey, every 7 days, we have this little celebration of Easter, and it's all setting us up for the big celebration that Easter is, right? So the little steps of the way. Every meal is the destination in a certain way. Every, you know, so do be festive, celebrate, do those things. It's a way of making the rest of it all make sense. Okay, so those are 7 bits. Let me sort of stop there and say, which of those, and just take a minute, I want you to actually take a minute, take your pen, write something down a little bit. Which of those which of the 7 sort of strikes you either as most interesting, most difficult to imagine, or most, you're most excited about? You can pick one of those 3 options. Okay, which dimension of this you really want to kind of think about and be intentional about. You know, that really strikes you right now. It could change by the time you get on the pilgrimage. But which of these things? Circle it, maybe make a couple notes of why, because I want to hear from folks about what you think about this. We're okay for time?
Yeah. You're okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Let me finally get my coffee. All right, everybody got one? So, what'd you pick?
Ritual, make my journal regularly, but I never wake up early to journal first thing. On this trip, I definitely will take time to do it every day.
Great.
So it would be helpful. So,
That's fantastic. You know, and there's a practical reason for that, for one, because you won't always have time as you're making the transition from this place to that place to do that. So if you set the time aside this way, I think that's a really good idea. Yeah, and it's great to hear that. So what I love about that is you're building on practice that you already have of journaling, but sort of setting the time aside in an intentional way. Thanks, Eric. That's really great. What else? What would be the pick? Didn't get to you anyway. Yeah.
I also choose ritual.
Uh-huh.
But I kind of thought of it as doing something every day. So, I mean, yes, it's breaking a habit of like what you regularly do, but I don't know what I'm going to think of when I get there. But
Just looking for something new, to a new experience or a new practice or a new something to do, and try to make every day new in that way. I love that. I love that. Great. What else? So, Rob, what'd you write down?
I'm thinking about
I mean, here's the thing, we all know that we do this, right? And yet, we find ourselves doing it all the time.
My kid phones are underneath those table tents.
Yeah, there you go. You know, this, my kids bust my wife and me all the time, because we're always like, get off your phones! And they're like, Dad? Yeah, right. So I think that's great. I think that's really great. And you know, that would be something you talk about as a group. You know, there's no sort of compulsion here, but you know, maybe you guys want to make a concerted effort as a group to do that particular way. What else?
I said leave it behind. Would you really think about like, oh, someone brings something back? I don't really like, never thought like they do something somewhere.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, I just think that is so cool. And you know, I didn't sort of think about it until I went to Lourdes and I saw like all these things. And you know, obviously that's sort of testimony to a miracle or whatever. But there is this sense of like, you know, somehow part of you is staying in there, which is kind of cool. You have any idea what that might be? Nothing about it. Right. Good. Who else? Joe, what do you think?
Just community. Just looking forward to experiencing all these new places with everybody and getting to know.
Great. Thanks. Sarah, how'd you?
I guess it kind of goes with a few, but just like being intentional about every day. You know, just like either in the morning, like setting an intention and being really purposeful about why I'm there and what I want to accomplish.
That's great. I mean, that's a word it can sound kind of fancy or whatever, but that's the word that I think covers all of these things, right? To be intentional. Right? That's what makes a pilgrimage different from a vacation. Right? You're saying, okay, I'm doing these things because, well, what? Fill in the blank, but you ask the question, what's the because? Why am I doing these things? So that's great. The one counsel I would give, and I think you know this, but just to say out loud, that we could say that we want to be intentional, unless we find a way to sort of think about it in particular ways, it'll often just remain a kind of aspiration or a hope. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, pilgrimage has a certain kind of expected shape in these ways, is that people have learned that, you know, leaving things behind, you know, all of these things are ways in which to make it intentional. So that's great. What else? Kate? Good choice. Yeah. Tell me why.
I studied abroad in Prague, and we made meals like morning meals. Like, they took hours, and they were really fun.
Yeah, and you know, and this isn't, you know, there's nothing sort of necessarily religious about this, but one of the great experiences you can have going to Italy is that Italians have a different relationship. They think about meals and food differently. That already has a sort of richer significance than the kinds of ways in which we often relate to food, like standing over the sink eating our ramen noodles or whatever, right? You know, I mean, that food becomes an opportunity for celebration, for rest, for rejuvenation in this way. We'll have some great meals there, sure. Yeah, great. What about the other key?
As of like faith and serving out, this is like it's kind of junior and academic for like 2 years in a little bit. It's pretty easy to like get into a really comfortable spot like in the grade. And so I'm kind of like looking for something that's like gonna challenge me a little bit.
Yeah. So yeah, great. I like that. I like that. There's a way in which even the whole faith experience here can be a kind of comfort zone. Because of the
faith, like I would make sense in the molecules, just like some week I work on Cambodia for 4 weeks. I love to do the new college, I like to do such a short period of time. Challenging, when you try to stay power and make the surf for you to come.
I love that. Great. Thank you.
I think it's good, trying to stay up at all and stay with that.
Great. Brother?
I picked faith and something else too, because, you know, being with so long, being comfortable with how everything is, like, spiritually and socially and all that.
So I like the way you said that because it captures this sense that, you know, pilgrimage is all about in a certain way, that the spiritual, the physical, the social, all of that is all connected, right? And one of the habits that we can have when we're in our comfort zone is to kind of partition these things out in certain ways, right? And there's a way in which a pilgrimage has this power to sort of compress everything together to remind us the way in which we're all really deeply connected. So I like that too.
I like the meaning behind. I like the idea of like using a symbol behind something.
That's great. That's great. So Joe, what are you on? Vincent, what are you on?
I also put attention, just realizing that there are emotions, connections,
That's great. I think that's one of the hardest things for in our own age. Maybe it's the hard of any age, I don't know. But in our own age, our own way of living in the world, that we just kind of to actually have the time and space to step back and say, why am I doing this? We don't often do it. I think that's a really bad thing. Alright, go ahead.
Also, in being behind, we're just
It's worth it.
I chose ritual, and that was just about trying to figure out this plan for the entire week.
Great. Fantastic. Well, good. So I think I got everybody, yeah? So that just gives you a little bit of a taste and hopefully gives you some things to work on. So my goal here was really to sort of give you a little bit of background on how the pilgrimage has been used or practiced within the Christian tradition and beyond, but then to sort of give you some of these elements that you can bring in, and hopefully you're sort of starting on that process today, to fold some of these, as many of these elements as you can, into your experience. And so the last thing I would say to you is that I really would, and I've said it a couple in pieces here and there, but I would encourage you to maybe make good use of this time between now and when you go, to maybe have some conversations together. You've each shared individually about some things you might think about. But are there things that you want to sort of come to as a group, that you want to be sort of characteristic of your experience together, or some, just, they can be vague or they can be specific, but, just some sort of ground rules. I know Father Joe will have some ground rules that will help you get on this way, but there's a real power if you kind of do some group discernment here that really help you to sort of think, okay, what do we want this pilgrimage to be? So I encourage you to do that. And beyond that, I can't wait to hear the stories, right? I had such a great and rich and powerful experience on my pilgrimagio 4 years ago. And so I will look forward to the opportunity to hear all about it as you guys go. Thanks very much.